All right, welcome everyone to our webinar today, Communication. We have Teressa and Rebecca back for the fourth and final installment in our four-part webinar series. And we are so excited to have them back. We've been so grateful for all of the information that you guys have shared with us. Teressa is a BCBA and Rebecca is a BCABA. They both have a ton of experience in parent education, in-home training, autism, different special needs. And they are here today to share their experience and share some great resources and really practical strategies about how we can improve our communication with our children. So I'm going to go ahead and turn the presentation over to Teressa and Rebecca. If you guys have questions during the presentation, you can type them into the chat. If it's a little bit longer of a question, we will also have some dedicated time at the end to where you can unmute your microphone and talk that way too. All right, welcome and thank you.
Thank you for having us. Okay, so Sylvia did a great job of giving us our introduction. So today we'll be talking about functional communication training. It often uses an acronym as FCT. So we're going to describe what functional communication training is. In order to really understand how to implement functional communication training, we'll go over the functions of behavior. So really understanding what your child's behavior is trying to communicate, because behavior is communication. Then looking at some data, some way that we can look at those behaviors from a big picture and see what are some areas that my child needs that support in, and then some strategies that you guys can implement. So we'll go through these. So in a nutshell, when we talk about functional communication training, we're basically looking at identifying what's the purpose of my child's behavior. So my child is engaging in a behavior, and what is the purpose of it? Is it because they want access to something? Is it because he hurt himself? Is it because he needs a break? And then ultimately, that challenging behavior, we want to replace it with a behavior that serves the same purpose, but is more appropriate. So them communicating that they wanted iPad for some more time, them communicating that they needed to go outside for a little bit because they've been cooped up indoors all day, them communicating that they needed a hug or a squeeze because they were in an overwhelming environment. So really with functional communication training, we're looking at replacing some of those challenging, difficult problem behaviors with more appropriate behaviors that are able to communicate their needs to us as adults, family members, caregivers. So there's the two parts to functional communication training. We're going to start on the first part and then we'll transition to the second part. So the first part is we're going to focus on reinforcing appropriate responses. So your child may have some skills already that they use to communicate, but they don't always use them to communicate, especially for our 2-year-olds when they get upset or when they want something, or they need it now, they often resort to negative behaviors. So we want to make sure that we're reinforcing some of those appropriate responses that will happen just naturally. So in order to look at some of those appropriate responses, again, we've got to understand our functions of behavior, which Rebecca is going to go through with you, really breaking down behavior into what happened and what's going on in the environment, what triggered it. We'll talk about functional equivalence. So we want to make sure that the behavior that we're teaching our child, or the communication skill that we're teaching, is in line with what they want. So if he's crying and frustrated because he needs a break, we're teaching him to either say the word break, to sign for break, to use a full phrase to say, I need a break before I finish. Then we're looking at what's the replacement behavior. So again, the replacement behavior has to be equivalent. And then how do we choose it? If we have a kid who's nonverbal, we're not going to focus on choosing a word. We're going to choose something that's in his skill set. So if he is using signs regularly, then signs will be the replacement behavior that we focus on. And then the last piece that you'll look at is extinction strategies. And that's on the other end of it when we look at getting rid of some of those challenging behaviors. So we're going to break each of these down for you. So Rebecca is going to talk to you about the functions of behavior.
Good morning, everybody. So the functions of behavior, like Teressa mentioned, we have to identify that so that we know exactly what the child is trying to communicate and also know how we're going to replace the behavior. So the four main functions of behavior that we have are sensory. This is really behavior that kids engage in because it provides input to their body. we may not understand it, or maybe we're kind of thinking like, that's a little bit funky, or we're like, that's odd. But it feels good. And we all have it. It's not just kids. We do things that make us feel good in terms of our senses, like, you know, playing with Play-Doh, biting our fingers, biting pens, twirling our hair. Maybe we like to smell things because it relaxes us, like your essential oils. It feels good, right? So those that sensory piece is one form of function of behavior. Then we have escape and avoidance. Typically, we see this more so when kids don't want to follow a direction or engage in a specific activity, or maybe they're trying to get rid of that. They're trying to get out of doing something. So they engage in this behavior to avoid or escape anything they don't want to do, or maybe they're in a situation that they don't want to be in. So like being in a crowded area, right? If it's too noisy and it's too much, or they don't like people being too close to them, that situation they might want to escape from. Attention seeking behavior. So this is behaviors that children display when they're seeking attention from adults or siblings or grandparents, anybody that they really, really like to have attention from. And it can be that they look at that person and maybe engage in a negative behavior, like climbing on the TV stand, and they just kind of wait to see if mom's going to come and say, no, don't do that. And then they start laughing. So it's an attention seeking behavior. The no part, sometimes we when we think about, we say no as a way for kids to stop doing something. Sometimes that becomes a game for children. If they know no means that mom or dad is going to come and get me and pick me up or give me some type of attention, they often do it more because they know that someone's going to come and get them and give them that desired attention they want. And then we have tangible. So tangible is behaviors that children or adults do to gain access to a desired item. Normally we see it with like candies, right? When we go to the candy aisles, or toys when we go to the store and we tell the kid sees a toy and they want it, and we say, no, we can't buy that, and they engage in that behavior. It's because they want access to that desired item. So once we know what the functions of behaviors are, we can take data. So it lets us see what we're looking for in terms of like what triggers the behavior and what our consequences are. So Teressa made this ABC recording sheet that you guys will get a copy of. So it helps really identify what type of communication the behavior is trying to communicate. So in the beginning of you have your ABCs. At the beginning, you have your A, your antecedent. So this is really, you write down what exactly happens prior to the child engaging in that behavior. So what were you doing? What was the child doing? Where were we at? What time it was? Even knowing the time and the date and how long it occurs also lets us know if there's a pattern. So sometimes when we do this data, we see that a kid engages in problem behavior right before lunchtime. And that lets us know, oh my gosh, he's hungry, and no wonder he's crying on the floor and screaming because he's hungry and wants some cookies or some food. And that lets us know, like, we need to give him a gesture or a sign that he's hungry. So knowing the time and how long it occurs is really important as well. So we can write down like what he was doing, what did we say, what were they doing, what person was in the room as well. And then the B, your behavior, is exactly what did the child do? What did the behavior look like? And we talked about last week about like knowing that what exactly the behavior is versus just saying it's a tantrum is more important, because sometimes tantrums vary depending on the function of behavior. A kid may throw themselves on the floor and scream when they want access to something, or maybe they go into like pulling their hair if they want to escape. So knowing exactly what the behavior looks like will let us know exactly what the function is. And then C, your consequence, is what did we do, or what did the parent say after this behavior was displayed by the child, that may reinforce or punish the behavior. So all of that, your ABC, your time and your dates, will let you see the function of the behavior and some type of pattern, which will help us replace the behavior to something more functionally. So let's look at this example. So here we have, remember the ABCs is what happens before, the antecedent, your behavior, what the behavior looks like. C is your consequence, what your response is, what changes in the environment if they engage in this behavior. And then we have our function. So in the next slide, we have a real example here. So let's see. So we have child sees candy in the kitchen. They see it on the counter, they want it, and the behavior is child screams and cries. That is a really objective definition of the behavior. And the consequence is grandma gives the candy to the child, and our function is tangible. So when we see this, we can think about what is functionally equivalent. What can we teach the child to communicate more functionally, to serve as a mode of communication to gain access to this cookie? So for her, this is her asking for cookie and screaming equals access to the cookie. So now we want to teach her, okay, what else can we do that's a little bit more appropriate and can communicate with a lot of people that they want this cookie. So if we go to the next slide, we have the example. So what are some equivalent behaviors? So in this bottom area, you see, okay, we can teach a child, I want cookie. If they're vocalizing words, maybe a kid's not vocalizing words yet, and maybe they have gestures, so we can teach them like put your hand out and then you get cookie. And signing for cookie, right? If kids are learning some signs, we can teach them how to sign cookie, or using the visuals or PACS or the AAC device to request cookies. All of these other modes of communication equal access to that tangible behavior that they want, or the tangible item that they want. So then we replace it with this other appropriate communication, and they're able to gain access to that item, but also they can do it with a variety of people. What we see with with families is that sometimes parents know exactly what different cries their child has, or like what certain sounds they make with specific items, and they know, okay, this means that they want milk, or this means that they want to go outside. But if somebody comes in that doesn't know the child and they do that sound, does that person know exactly what they're communicating? Probably not. So it makes it a little bit harder. So we always want to teach something that's functional so that they can generalize it to a variety of people. Okay, and then the next slide, remembering that behavior is communication. So anytime a child engages in some type of behavior, just think, what is my child trying to communicate? There's a reason why they're engaging in this behavior. It's not just because they're being bad. It's really trying to express what they need. And when we know that function, we can teach them appropriate ways to communicate their needs. So Teressa will go over some replacement strategies.
So when you're talking about communication and the behaviors, we want to pick a behavior that will be a replacement that's something already in our learner skill set. So again, if that learner is already using visuals, that's a good option. We don't want to have to teach a brand new skill, because that could take time. So if we're looking at teaching a brand new word, or we're looking at teaching a kid to use visuals, that's a hard skill. But if we have a kid who taps and knows how to tap others, if we have a kid who knows how to do the open hand for other items, but doesn't necessarily use it when he wants cookies, these are all things that you want to consider. It's already in his skill set, so it's going to be easy to just get this kid to do it for other items. You want to choose a behavior that's appropriate for your learner's level. So again, if my learner is a younger learner and they're still learning how to use one word, I don't want to require him to say, I want a cookie. Because if he only has one or two words in his skill set, I want a cookie is a really high requirement. And so he's more likely to give up and just not want to do that demand because it's too hard. So think about that piece too. You don't want it to be something that's too difficult or too challenging, because then they will resort to the behaviors, because the behaviors are what gets a response immediately. Choose a method that might be readily available. So again, it's in their skill set, but even still, some of our parents, we create visuals for them and we send them home with the visuals, but sometimes the parents lose the visuals. And so we have to think, okay, this isn't something that's readily available for them, or we have families who use the AAC devices, the tablets. and they use them at speech therapy, but they don't use them at home. So we want something that's readily available. So that's why we often lean towards sign language, gestures, pointing, or even the vocal language. And again, it's got to require minimal effort. You don't want them to have to give you a full phrase. This is a fallback. This is, okay, he's frustrated. I need him to communicate what he wants for me, and let's have him fall back on this skill, right? So looking at some examples that you can consider within the functional communication training realm, tapping an adult for attention, using a gesture. So we all point to things. We all do the open hand gesture. You have younger kids who do the hands up gesture to get someone to pick them up. Kids sometimes will develop their own gestures or their own signs, and that's okay as long as you and everybody in the home understands him, then that works. We have kids who are nonverbal who push and pull adults, so they'll take you to an area that they need something in. The use of sign language. So again, we're very much for using adaptive sign language. So if your learner has some struggles with fine motor, you can adapt a sign, or you can make it simpler for your learner. Other things would be like PECs or visuals, so using the visual cue cards. An AAC device is like a tablet. That's basically where your learner can type in or click on an icon and it'll say ice cream. And that will alert you that your child wants ice cream, even though it might not be the best time, but it'll be there. And then again, pointing is always a really good way for your child to indicate, especially with kids with special needs or learning disabilities, or kids who are just picking up language. These are ways for them to fall back on it. So instead of my kid going in the kitchen, seeing the cookie, getting frustrated because he doesn't remember how to ask for cookie, he can't remember that word, he can fall back on the pointing, right? Or he can fall back on the sign for cookie. So really looking at some of these examples and what's his fallback? What's going to be his alternative way to communicate so we don't run into the behaviors? So I made this chart. It's a super handy chart. We even use it with our specialists that are in the home and our families. But basically, when you break down each function of behavior, looking at, well, how does my child communicate that? Or how can I help them communicate that? So when we're looking at sensory, for my kids who are struggling with sensory, getting them to request headphones because they're in an environment where it's too loud, it's too overstimulating. So even if he does this, and that's his way of communicating headphones, then it gets his needs met and we don't run into the tantrum or the meltdown that results from overstimulation. A visual of a body sock. So we have a lot of our kids who really like those body socks and they love stretching in them and being inside of them. So if we have that visual card and it's on our fridge, he can go grab it. He can bring it to me to let me know that he wants his body sock in that moment. Some kids will sign fidgets or sign a spin for fidget spinner. So we could teach them how to sign something like that. Signing for a break if they're in a really loud environment. So we teach a lot of our kids, if before COVID, when we were in restaurants like Fridays and it would get too loud, we would teach them to ask for a break and we could take them outside for a walk, give them a break away from all of that. If you're looking at the escape and avoid, so your kid has a lot of escape behaviors, or they don't want to follow through with the direction, or they're trying to avoid something, whether it be remote learning, whether it be, going to physical therapy, or you asking them to do chores, getting them to functionally communicate would be things like having them sign all done or for a break, or even asking for help. Sometimes we give kids these demands that are a little bit too high, and we said clean your room, but when we looked at the room, it looks like a bomb went off in there. And that's a lot to do. So if he asked for help, then okay, I'll come help, I'll step in and give you some support, but you're still going to do it with me. And so it's a little bit of give and take. Asking a parent for assistance. So even the kids who are nonverbal will hand you things. So if something's broken, or sometimes when the iPad, the YouTube pulls up a commercial and my niece doesn't want to watch the commercial, she'll hand it to me so that I can push that skip ad button for her. So asking for assistance, utilizing the visual for an all done or break is good. Some of our kids will just start cleaning up. So when we used to be in the homes pre-COVID and we would go work with kids, sometimes they would clean up our toy bags and put all our toys back in and be like, okay, bye. And that was their way of avoiding work and saying, all right, teacher, it's time to go. Like, we've worked enough today. Another option is shaking their head no. So sometimes we present them with an undesired item or material or even food, and getting them to understand they could just tell us no is a good way to functionally communicate. At some point, you're not always going to accept that no, but you want to validate it because it's functional for him to say, no, I don't want that. No, I don't like that. Long term, you'll work on, okay, I know you don't like it, but let's just do one, and then you'll kind of bargain and get a little bit in there. For tangibles, you're looking at things like my child wants access to something and either they're not getting it immediately, they're not able to communicate that that's what they want. So things like pointing or reaching for a toy, signing for specific food, toys, or activities, handing an item again to an adult because they want you to help open it because maybe it's in a container that he can't open. Maybe he's missing the piece and it's not working the way it's supposed to. Using a device like an AAC device or using a visual. So sometimes kids will bring us their visuals of their trampoline because that means he wants to go outside and jump on his trampoline. That's perfect. Or long-term using words, word approximations, and or phrases. I want to go outside. I want to jump. In the attention-seeking behavior, so these are your kids who want attention and they go about it in all the wrong ways, we could teach them things like tapping an adult, pulling an adult to play with a toy. So sometimes our kids are playing with something and they build something and they look at us for that. You did it, great job. And we sometimes aren't paying attention because we're scrolling through Instagram or, we're doing something else that we're busy with. And so getting them to come to us to pull and bring us down to play or bringing a toy that they want to share with us is a great way to get attention. Using adult names, mom and dad, these are perfect ways to get our attention. But sometimes as parents, we often ignore because we're busy. So making sure that you respond to those good, appropriate responses. Using the picture card for either hug or tickle. So sometimes when our kids get overwhelmed and they just need a little bit of attention and a little bit of love, that's okay. They can request a hug using either the card or the word or a sign. Sometimes we teach this as our hug. And then phrases. So like, look at me or watch me. These are great ways for kids to get our attention. And instead of climbing a bookcase that we're worried is going to fall over on them. So these are all great options that you can look at. Again, this isn't an exhaustive list, but it is a good point to start and some things to consider when you're thinking about your child and where they're at developmentally. So once you've decided, okay, my kid is engaging in escape behaviors and I need to work on this, you want to arrange opportunities to work on it. You don't always want to wait till the tantrum comes and then say, well, you need to ask me for a break. You don't want to wait for that point because for most of our kids and for even us, once we see red and once we're upset, it's kind of downhill from there. It's hard to go back. So you want to set it up so that way you can practice the skill, you can teach it, you can reinforce it and say, yes, you asked for a break instead of running into the tantrum always. So practicing the skill, you want to do it in those natural opportunities. So you can set up the environment. You can set up an activity that you know is not his favorite, that he struggles with or he needs help with. And then you're going to set up those opportunities. When you see your child getting to that point where they are going to ask for a break or they're going to want that break or they're going to get frustrated, go ahead and remind them, do you need a break? Are you all done with this? And so before the behavior happens, you're going to remind them, this is what you do to get out of doing this activity, not the tantrum. This is what you do. So we'll set up the environment and we'll create those natural opportunities. So another natural opportunity would be routines. If my learner does not like toothbrushing or hair washing, we'll teach them to practice that skill during those non-preferred activities. At some point, we have to get through toothbrushing and hair brushing, but if my learner likes to do toothbrushing in 1 minute increments because he says all done, that's okay. And I want to respect that. I want to be mindful of that, especially for kids with sensory needs, that toothbrushing and hair washing is a challenge. It could be more harmful for us to push through it and have those behaviors than to accept that functional communication. Sabotage is another way to kind of arrange an opportunity for language. So sometimes if a kid is working on asking for items and using their language, we'll sometimes give them an empty cup with no juice in it to practice him asking for juice. Or I'll only fill up the juice cup halfway and then let him drink that. And then he's got to ask me for more juice. So I get to practice that skill again. Missing parts to a toy, like, oh no, where did it go? That gets your kid to start to troubleshoot and ask for things or even ask for help. When your kid's attention seeking, we would purposely have parents pretend to be busy. So I would say, Mom, pretend to be on your phone and let's practice how he gets your attention. This is okay. It's natural. It's very natural for us as parents to be busy or to have other things to do, but let's teach your kid the appropriate way to get your attention. Setting up the environment. These are things like putting things up high. The iPad is always something that a lot of our kids like to ask for, but if your kid has access to it all day, every day, there's no need for them to use language. So we tell parents, put items up high, put favorite toys in bins they can't open, because then it creates that communication opportunity. It creates that opportunity for you to see them struggling with that bin and you to remind them, hey, did you need some help? Just ask mom, I'll help you. And then temptations. So other temptations would be giving some, not all. So giving some of, Cheerios, but not all of them. Giving some to one kid, but not the other, and waiting for your nonverbal kid or your kid who's working on communication to ask. Or even having the older sibling model it is always a good opportunity. These are all great ways that you want to set it up so you can practice that skill before we hit the behavior. Okay, so errorless teaching. So with errorless teaching, so you're working on practicing this skill. And with errorless teaching, you don't want your learner to be wrong or to get frustrated that they're wrong. Even us as adults, it's hard when you're wrong. It feels bad and you're like, oh, I messed up. I didn't get that right. So you don't want them to feel wrong. You don't want them to have an error. So we do errorless teaching. So you're going to reinforce your child, giving them positive reinforcement. Even if he tried to say something and it wasn't close to cookie, I'll be like, yeah, cookie. All right, here you go. And I would give that child a piece of a cookie, even though he said, that's fine. I'm reinforcing his use of vocal and trying to talk. Prompting and fading. So when your child is struggling, let's say we're working on signs and they're not using the correct sign, just go in and help them. Do hand over hand to make that sign happen. So that way they can get access to that item and we don't run into the tantrum. Some parents forget to give credit for those successful attempts. So it doesn't always have to be perfect. He doesn't always have to say, I want cookie. It might be, I want cookie. And that's okay. You'll shape it and you'll say, yes, you want a cookie. Okay, here you go. And you'll get it clearer long term, but you want to provide reinforcement. If your requirement is too high and we force him to say, I want cookie clearly every single time, it's going to be hard to make that happen and he won't get access to that cookie. And he's likely to just give up and be like, I'm done with you, lady. Makes sense, right? And then things that are relatively simple to implement, you want to put in there. So this is kind of anytime we're working on a new skill, you want to make it simple for your kid to do. You want to allow them to be successful. So don't make things hard or difficult. Just take it slow, be patient, but be persistent, practice it regularly, and then make sure everybody's practicing it with you. So this is the front end. I know that my kid can tap. I'm going to work on him tapping me for attention. I know that my kid can say mom. I'm going to practice him saying mom for attention. This is the front end of it. So we're working on this behavior that is relatively new and maybe we're using it in a new setting or a new area, but this is how we're going to start to work on it so we don't run into the behaviors. Because ultimately, I don't want you to run into behaviors. That's a hard job. Now, the second part of that functional communication is this end. This is where we have to place those behaviors that we don't want to see on what we call extinction. So extinction, you want to think is like the dinosaurs. We want it to go away and disappear. We don't want it around anymore, right? So we're just going to talk about this side of things now. So when you're placing an unwanted behavior on extinction, so again, going back to that functions of behavior, because that's, for us, it's behavior 101. If you understand that as a parent, your job becomes a million times easier. So if we place that behavior on extinction, and sometimes we get some weird behaviors or some behaviors that kids are doing that we accidentally reinforced, and now they're happening more often. Let's say it's a sensory behavior. So let's talk about like a kid, for an example, that jumps on the couch. He likes a lot of movement, but he likes to jump on the couch. And I don't necessarily care that he jumps on my couch, but now we took him to, Aunt's house and he's jumping on Aunt's house's couch. And that is bad because I don't want him jumping on other people's couches, but he just realized this is what I do, So the extinction procedure under sensory is that we change the consequence, which I can't really change the consequence. Jumping on a couch is fun and amazing no matter where you're at. But I can redirect, right? I can stop him from doing it and I can redirect him. So we can redirect him to his trampoline. Let's go outside and jump on your trampoline. Or maybe when we're at Aunt's house, we can't jump on the couch, but we can go outside and jump off the curbs, right? So we can redirect to something appropriate. And then what we'll also do is we'll add in a replacement. What's going to replace the behavior? Having him use his visual to request jumping time. Having him say that he needs to jump. or he needs to move, or he needs to go outside, right? So that sensory piece is big. These kids need this movement. It's almost like a lightning bolt sometimes that goes through them, and we can't stop it. We just need to run with it and provide it in an appropriate manner. Now, looking at escape, my child engages in escape behaviors, or they're avoiding something, right? So let's talk about our remote learners. We have a lot of kids who are doing remote learning, and it is a struggle, even working remotely myself. So let's use this example of the child closes the laptop during remote learning. Mom opens the laptop and she doesn't allow him to escape. So this is good. Mom did what she was supposed to do. She didn't allow him the opportunity to escape. We don't want him to be able to get out of doing remote learning, but we can allow him a break. We can have him request appropriately that he wants a break. So instead of him closing the laptop, which is inappropriate and a bad way of escaping, let's have him ask for a break. Let's have him ask for, maybe an item that will help him sit through the remote learning. So look at this piece, and this is your functional communication form. You're gonna either request a break. He can use a visual, he can use a sign, he can use a gesture, he can use a full phrase like, "Mommy, I need a break." And that's okay, but this is gonna be more appropriate than him closing the laptop. But again, him closing the laptop, it's a behavior, but it is communicative. We as parents know and understand he's done. He's burnt out. He's sick of this remote learning. Totally get it, but let's teach him a functional way to communicate it. Attention seeking. So for your attention seeking kids, right, let's look at our example. So the child screams to get mom's attention. This usually happens, when we're on the phone and we're trying to have a really important conversation. It's always at the best time possible, but your child screams at the top of their lungs. And normally as parents, we're like, what is going on? You freak out. But in this situation, mom's going to ignore, because we want mom to ignore. We want him to realize that this behavior of screaming is no longer going to work to get mom's attention. So in order for that to happen, mom will ignore. But on the front end, throughout the day, we're going to work on the child tapping mom, saying mom's name, right? So again, you work on this front end so that these things don't happen. But when these things happen, we have to go into planned ignoring. We have to not look at it. We have to not give it attention, which is super hard. Trust me when I say it's really hard. But if you ignore it, the behavior will go away. At times, the behavior gets worse before it gets better. But I guarantee you, if it's getting worse, you're on the right track. You've determined your function. You've picked the right way to replace it and the right extinction strategy. And now we just have to work on this end of, let's teach him the right way to get our attention. So sometimes in this situation, when our kids get upset and, he's screaming, and now he's throwing stuff to get my attention, and now he's chucking things at my head, and now he came over and bit me, then we'll have a parent come in and redirect. So if dad's home, then I'll have dad bring him over and tap mom, and then mom can say, yes, what did you need? And that way he gets mom's attention. So we can still work on practicing this skill even when he's in that moment of utter meltdown. For tangibles, again, in this example, child hits the parent when they're denied iPad time. Typically, parents will give the iPad back, or they're like, okay, fine, here you go, right? But in the example, we want you to remove the iPad because you've already said no. We have to continue to deny access. This is where a lot of parents, when we do say, yes, you can say no, iPad is all done. This is the perfect time to use no when you're denying access. However, when we're denying access, you take away all their control. So provide some more choices. And then again, teaching him that he can request iPad later, or that we can request iPad when we're done eating. There's other strategies with this one, especially for our kids who like access to tangibles and just resort to negative behaviors. It's usually because they don't have the ability to communicate their needs. So functional communication training is big in terms of this tangible piece. It can really change your child's behavior and get rid of a lot of those negative behaviors, because now he has a way to communicate, even if it is something so small as pointing or handing you a desired item or gesturing to that iPad that's up on the counter. So really look at this piece. And again, you have to make a lot of different decisions based on the function of behavior. So that's why that function of behavior piece is always going to be kind of your backbone to working with your own child. So when we're looking at this extinction strategy, this, again, you're working on the back end. It's harder when you work on the back end. So The behaviors are happening and I'm going to ignore. I'm not going to give him a break. I'm not going to give him access to it, which these are all correct and they work. But without this front end, if you're not teaching anything, then these behaviors might stick around for longer. Then these behaviors might be harder to get rid of. So you really want to make sure you're working on the front end. You want to work on this end first. Focus on teaching your kid. Focus on how you prompt them and how you remind them to use that functional communication. And then there are going to be days when it happens and the behavior occurs, then you react. Then you get to have these strategies in place and you get to prompt or deny access or ignore. So I don't always necessarily want you to work on the back end where you're just ignoring your kid all day. That's horrible advice. And if anybody tells you it, don't do it. Make sure you're practicing a skill that's going to replace some of these bad behaviors. Okay. Okay. So Rebecca's going to go over some things to remember.
Okay. So, based on like what Teressa had reviewed, some things, big points we want to take away from that is to prompt appropriate behavior. So how she mentioned, we need to teach the child what's appropriate to gain attention depending on the function. We want to prompt it, right? If your kid needs help, we assign help and remind them like you can ask, use your words, just so that they don't run into wanting to engage in that negative behavior and we just avoid it all overall. The function must match. So we need to have a replacement behavior that's appropriate based on the child's skill set, but also we have the right function of behavior. If a kid's screaming because then we think it's attention, but really it's because they like to hear themselves and they're getting some sensory input, then we have the function wrong. So we need to make sure that the function of the behavior it's correct so we can replace it with something more appropriate. Being consistent, again, practice makes perfect. That helps us change behavior over time. So the consistency part of it is very important. I will say, like behavior, we got to do several practices through the day, right? So even if we say, okay, we're going to work on the kid asking for cookie and we only give one cookie and that was he only got to practice that one time that day, it's going to be hard for him to remember to do it the next day. So maybe we break that cookie up in several pieces so we can practice it 7 to 8 times in one day, and that gets that behavior to be replaced a little bit more quickly. So the consistency is key, and making sure that everyone is doing it, not just one parent or only parents and not grandparents. So because if we're still reinforcing those behaviors that we're trying to place on extinction, it makes it really hard for the child to know what's expected for that behavior. Remaining calm and patient. Again, these behaviors that kids display, there's a reason, but also it's been reinforced for a long time and it doesn't change overnight. It takes time, even for us, right? It takes some time to adjust and learn these new things. So staying patient and calm is a big part of replacing these behaviors. So the next slide, we're going to go over ways to implement communication or replacement behaviors through routine. So routine intervention, this is what we've been working on remotely. We have noticed that it's much easier to implement functional communication training through routines that are already embedded in your day-to-day life, so that you don't need to add in different things or specifically set out time to work on this behavior. When we add it into routines, it becomes more natural for parents to just do it day to day. So we can add in functional communication training with any of these routines: bath time, music time, sleep time, Legos, eating, right? So for example, we can add in functional communication training with eating. Instead of just giving the child what they want to eat, we can provide choices and have him ask for that specific item that they want. We can give them just the bowl with their food and not the utensil, and have them ask for that. And it creates that opportunity to ask for those items that they need, but they already know that that's part of their routine. If we do toothbrushing, right, they know, okay, we get the water on, we wet the toothbrush, and mom normally gives me toothpaste. If we don't give the toothpaste, they have to ask for it, and it creates that opportunity for them to communicate what's next in that routine. So adding it in through your day-to-day, providing choices with dressing, asking them what they want to wear, all of that will help get them to start using their communication more naturally through their day, and it becomes consistent because these are routines that you're doing every day. There's nothing that's changing in terms of having to specifically work on one way of communicating. In the next slide, we go over communication temptations. So these are ways that we have identified that work in terms of creating those opportunities within routines and your day-to-day. So the first one is pretending you don't know. Super simple. You can just present something and just pretend you don't know what it does, or you don't know what the child wants. Let's say they have a puzzle and they don't know, that they don't know how to do something, and they want you to help them. That creates that opportunity for them to ask for that help, right? They can ask you to give you that puzzle, and you'd say, oh, you need help, I can help you do that. The change in routines, like I mentioned, like if they know those parts of those routines, like dressing, and okay, he knows that we put on shirt and then we put on pants, you can say, oh, shoes are next. And they're going to be like, no, wait, we're missing our pants. So then they can ask for pants. It gives them that opportunity to request that. Placing things out of reach. This is probably one of the things that I see more consistently in our field, is that mostly all things that the kid likes are within reach. So it doesn't create those opportunities for them to request. Like Teressa mentioned, like if they have tablet all day, it's hard for them to ask for it. Or if they have their juice cup out all day filled, it doesn't create that opportunity for them to ask for juice, or they're thirsty. So when we put things out of reach and they have to ask, we can prompt them to ask for juice or their cup. Closed containers. Again, this one is just giving them things that they're going to need help with. So closed package of goldfish, and a closed juice box. Yesterday I had a parent who was working on functional communication training who gave her child a Capri Sun not opened. She didn't poke the straw. She didn't open the wrapper. She just gave it to her. And it was really hard. It's hard for her because she knew that he was going to need help, but she created that opportunity. And it took him a couple of minutes because he really tried. He tried to open it. He unwrapped the straw. He was trying to poke it into the Capri Sun, but he couldn't do it. He tried to tilt it. He was really trying to problem solve this, but ultimately he needed mom's help. And so that prompted him to tap mom for attention and sign help and give her the Capri Sun. So that created that opportunity, like, okay, you need help. Let me reinforce this and help you do this. So that's a great way. Just anything that you feel like he's going to need help, let me just give it to them like this. And then that promotes that communication. Only providing some. This one's fun. So you can this one also helps you get more practice throughout the day with your child. So like if we have the goldfish snack, right, we can give them a few and not like the whole bag of goldfish, so that they have to come back and ask for more. Enjoying without offering. This one's also really fun. You can have the bag of goldfish and you don't share. You just start eating it in front of them. You make it enticing. You say, ooh, these are delicious. And if you don't offer, they're going to want it. So they're going to come and ask for some. And this, you can prompt them to ask for goldfish. And then missing pieces, giving some parts of activities or some parts of their routines and not giving them the rest. So let's say a kid's working on a puzzle or Mr. Potato Head, you give them only the potato and not the body parts. Or if you're doing painting, you give the paper and the paintbrush, but not the paints. It promotes that opportunity for them to ask for paints or their markers or a specific item that they want to do with this activity. So these are really easy ways that we can add in communication temptations or opportunities for them to communicate without it being seen like they're working for some of this, like we're making them use their language. Okay, so let's go over some ways that we can add in replacement behaviors based on the function. So the first one, for escape behaviors, we can teach a child to clean up, right? When a child's done with something, they can clean up the toys to communicate to others that they're done with that activity. They could put items away in the desired the specific area. In school, they do this, right? When they're done with an activity, they have to put it back in that specific shelf and before they move on to something else. So this lets the teacher know or other kids know, hey, he's done with this, so I can have access to that item. The all done card is good, having them give the all done card to parents to terminate a task, or even the sign up all done, I don't want it anymore, will let us know, okay, they're done, they can leave. Gestures, if a kid's not maybe vocalizing or isn't using signs yet, gestures are a great way to work on terminating some of those activities they don't want or saying no, right? They could shake their head, push the item away, they can shake their finger like, I don't want this. That lets us know, okay, they don't want to do this. Asking for a break. So sometimes if they do have to sit through some of those aversive tasks that they don't want to do, but it's something they have to do, like homework, they can ask for a break and then come back and do a little bit more, ask for another break. And then the last one is help. So oftentimes too, we notice that kids, when something's too difficult, they lose motivation to try it. And so they're like, I don't even want to try it, let me just leave. And then they lose that opportunity to learn what it is. So sometimes it's just getting them to understand how to ask for help if they can't do something. So then they're more inclined to try. So that's another way to work on replacing the escape behaviors. And the next slide, we have access behaviors. So ways to replace the behaviors for wanting access to desired items. The first one is accepting no. Although it's really hard, sometimes things are just not acceptable. So when we say no, we mean no. And Teressa talked about that whole extinction, like sometimes the behavior will get worse. And if we give in after what the behavior has gotten worse, we teach that child that they have to do all these behaviors in order to get access to that item. So when we say no, we want to mean no. It means it's not coming out at all. This will be a little bit tough because some kids have your tantrums and they go into really more impeding behaviors. But at some point, if you don't reinforce that behavior, their behaviors start to lower in terms of how long it occurs, and also they learn to self-regulate and learn how to cope and calm down themselves. Often though, we like to go into more of like, let's provide some other supports. So if we're going to say no, and we know we're going to say no to this activity, we can provide choices. You can't have tablet, but you can have outside time, or you can have time with your Legos. And these are your choices. And that way we don't give too much attention to that no behavior or no to that desired object, and we right away just give two different alternatives. Priming, so we can tell the child what's expected or when they're allowed to have access to that item. First, you need to do your homework, then you do your chores, and then you get to have your video game time. Letting them know what's expected beforehand will help them move through those activities more quickly. Pre-Mac, first eat dinner, then we have iPad, and letting them know they got to do that low preferred first, and then they get access to that desired item. A visual schedule can also help if they can see exactly what they need to do before they get access. And then the environment, placing the item out of reach in a designated bin. So if you have bins at different colors, red means stop, no, this is not available. We could put things that they can't have for that day there. And then when it's time for them to have it, you could put it in that green bin. Okay, these are things that you can choose for today. These are not available. And then they're able to visually see what they have access to for that day. And the next slide, we have attention-seeking behaviors. So when a kid loves to get a lot of attention, we want to do what we call non-contingent attention. So create opportunities where you interact with your child one-on-one and give a lot of that positive reinforcement, a lot of that positive attention with those activities, so that they don't seek out doing those negative behaviors to gain attention. The more we do that, the less they'll want to do that behavior. We can model appropriate ways to gain attention. Sibling can tap mom, and mom reinforces that behavior with sibling, and that promotes the other younger child to tap mom or say mom to ask for attention. We can provide options, so they can tap, they can say mom, they can maybe tug on their shirt. Just giving them different ways of gaining attention appropriately is important, so they know these are accessible, or these are options that you can use, but not the screaming or crying. Contingent attention, providing attention when they're doing good things. So most of the time we give attention when they're doing all the things that they shouldn't be doing. But if we start reinforcing those behaviors that they naturally just normally do through their day, maybe they're sitting and playing with the puzzle, or they're doing their homework, or they're playing with their sibling, providing attention during those times and saying, you're doing so great. Sharing, I love that you're doing your homework. Mom didn't have to tell you today. That's awesome. That reinforces that behavior, and they're more likely to do that behavior, and also not go into that negative way of getting attention. Identifying who's in the environment. So again, if we're replacing these behaviors and making sure that everyone is also not providing attention to those negative seeking behaviors will be important. And then reinforcing all good behaviors, even if it's not perfect. If a kid maybe tugged and you're working on tapping, you want to reinforce that because that's more appropriate than screaming. And if a kid says, Mom, you want to reinforce right away. Even if you have to say, you have to wait. So let's say you're talking to somebody and he says, Mom, you'll say, okay, I know you need help. Just wait. And that way you're still giving attention, but they're still waiting. But because it'll eliminate that whole like mom, and escalating, because then by the time you get there, you're reinforcing all of the screaming. So as soon as a child gives that appropriate attention, we want to reinforce that. In the next slide, we have sensory seeking behaviors. So the first one is trying it out. Teressa's really like adamant, like anytime a child does something sensory related, she wants to figure out what is it trying to provide. If you know what it's trying to provide, you might understand why they do it, what it feels like. So just try it out. Let's see what it does and see, okay, well, I can understand why they like to spin around and feel that sensation after. And you can also create like an opportunity to make it more social, right? Maybe you guys do spinning together and do ring around the rosy. So we can adjust it to make it more of an activity that's appropriate socially. Choosing your battles. So like Teressa mentioned, some kids like to jump, right? So knowing when it's appropriate and not appropriate, we can really choose our battles. If my kid's a runner and loves to run throughout the day, and he's not getting in the way of anybody and it doesn't really bug me, let's just let him run. He's not getting into anything, okay. But if he's doing things maybe more aggressive, running and like crashing into like the couches or crashing into hard surfaces or the walls, and you're noticing you're getting some cracks in the wall, then that's probably a behavior you want to redirect into a more appropriate location. So just knowing when to choose your battles and knowing which behaviors you're okay with or in which ones you're not, then we can work on replacing or making them more socially acceptable. Keeping it fun. So we all have sensory needs. It's not like just kids have it. We all do it. So just making it fun. We can do it together, find ways to make it more reinforcing for them to seek out somebody else. Some kids love like banging their head because they like the impact against the wall. Well, mom can do that. Mom can provide squeezes on this head, and guess what? It feels better if mom does it. So then we gain that opportunity to request head squeezes more functionally. And then the last area is collaborating. So if you know that your child has some of these sensory needs, discussing it with your OT or your ABA team, they might have different replacement behaviors that you guys can try within the home. Teressa's going to go over generalizing and maintaining the skills.
Okay, so once you've taught your child a functional way to communicate, once we've taught them to tap for attention and he's doing it with me, I want to make sure that I generalize the skill so that it maintains long term. Because if he only taps me to get attention, it's not really a skill that's happening across the board. So when you think about generalizing, you want to practice that skill across different people. So not only will he tap me for attention, but he taps dad, he taps grandma, he taps his teacher, making sure that we practice it with other people. Practice it across settings. So again, if we're practicing tapping, if we're at the park and playground, I'm going to set up the environment. I'm going to kind of ignore and see if he remembers to tap me while he's at the playground because he needs his juice cup or because he wants to leave the park or playground. So making sure that we're practicing it in different settings. You'll notice that kids will learn a skill in the home and not generalize it out into the community, or because we're at a theme park and everything's so exciting, I completely forget to use my words. So making sure that we practice it in different settings is big, and then across different examples. So for learners who are working on asking for cookies, there's a lot of different types of cookies. There's Oreos and Chips Ahoy and frosted cookies, and they all look different, but they're all still cookie, and he can still use that word cookie or that sign cookie to get access to them. So using different examples will help your kid generalize and maintain that skill long term. Looking at just long-term tricks and tips that you guys can implement, you always want to reinforce attempts. So again, if your child is trying, give them credit, because learning language and picking up skills and not resorting to negative behaviors takes a lot of work. Pay attention to the function, because sometimes your kid will do a behavior because he wanted access to something, and then all of a sudden he gets attention seeking, or this behavior used to be done for sensory, and where he would stick his finger up his nose because things were kind of squishy while he was sick. But now he's doing it for attention because we kind of laughed at it the first time. So pay attention to that function. Also pay attention to what they're motivated by. If my kid already had 6 cookies, he's not going to ask for another cookie. He's not motivated. He's probably sick of cookies and he's full. So pay attention to what they're motivated by, because that's how you're going to get them to use that language. Being persistent but patient. So again, you want to work and practice these skills constantly, but you have to be patient because it takes a little bit of time. And then we want to make sure that all adults are practicing and teaching that replacement. And then over long term, you want to delay prompting. So, in the beginning, with that case that Rebecca was talking about, where mom handed the juice with the straw and she didn't open it for him, she might immediately, when we're starting working with him, she might hand it to him and say, do you want open? Or she might hand it to him and say, do you need help? And immediately prompt him so he doesn't get frustrated. But long term, we'll kind of just pause and wait and kind of let them troubleshoot it, because a lot of the times the kids have the answers, or they've used that open or that help sign before. We just need him to remember to use it here. So then you'll start to delay the prompting so that your learner has some time to troubleshoot and figure things out on his own. Ultimately, every child is different. So when you're using these strategies, we always recommend that you consult with a professional, your speech therapist, your OT, just to make sure that you're working in the right realm. Because although we can teach you all of this, it's definitely harder to implement. It's definitely harder when you're in that moment and your child is throwing a tantrum and it's 12 o'clock at night and you're just like ready to give up. So I completely understand that you are going to walk away with these strategies, but just know that it takes some extra time to practice and to implement it. So be mindful and reach out to the people that you can to support you as you're making these decisions of what's going to work best for your child and for your family. And that is the end of our training. We really want to thank United Angels for allowing us to do all these amazing trainings with you guys. We just really love sharing information with families and helping support, especially during this time of need and COVID, and parents kind of looking for resources because they're stuck at home with their kids. So if you guys have any questions, you can feel free to ask them by either unmuting your mic or typing them in the chat. We'll stick around for another 5 to 10 minutes to see if there's any needs. Taylor, I got all your messages. I will send you a visual of a break card or a help card also, so that way you can print those and have them, and you can basically use them with your roommates. I think that's a great idea. And then if anybody has any other questions, feel free to unmute and ask. I know every situation is different. And if not, we really appreciate you guys coming, and thank you guys.
Thank you for joining us.
And do we have any questions from our parents that are here live? You can use the chat feature, or you feel free to unmute your microphone as well. Teressa?
Hi, I do have a question if that's okay.
Yes, of course it's okay.
Yeah, I have twin boys that are a little bit older. They're 11, but they have they have minimal communication, verbal, but they have a lot of repetitive behaviors. So they'll say my name like for many different reasons, mom can mean look at what I'm doing, or it could mean I'm hungry,
Okay.
So how do you kind of get kind of some, or even the word look, they say look a lot when I can't look every single time he jumps, So
Yeah.
how do I kind of help with those repetitive behaviors?
Of course. So the repetitive behaviors, it sounds like you've already identified them. They're usually within that sensory realm. So you want to provide them the opportunity to say mom, but it not be for attention. I would try to look at the situation and reinforce it when it is attention. So like if they are saying mom because they want your attention, then look at them and give them that attention. But if they're just saying it to say it because they like to say the word and it's funny to them, then maybe we redirect them to saying a different word, another word that's different, but it'll still give them that input. Anytime you have those repetitive behaviors, it's definitely looking at and seeing, what purpose is this serving for him? Is it a fun word because he likes the M sound? So I would even venture and play with other M sound words and see if that's what he likes, or if it's the tone of it, and then give him a different word. So let's say he's just doing it for sensory and he's saying mom, mom. Then I would try to give him a different word to say in that moment that sounds similar to mom but isn't mom, and that way he realizes, okay, I can say this for sensory and I need to say this word mom for when I want mom's attention or when I want mom. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Thank you.
Of course. Any other questions? That was a really good question. Yeah, and I definitely would work too on the, because they're nonverbal, them having other ways to communicate their wants and needs, like them handing you items. If you guys are working with speech and you guys are doing AAC devices, like practicing them saying mom and you turning and looking and giving them attention. So they realize that that's what the response is when they say mom.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds good.
I could definitely see that would be an interesting day for you.
Yeah, it gets to be a lot, but I mean, they are minimally verbal, so they can say more things now and getting to be able to communicate more things, but there's still just that repetitive behaviors that would be nice to replace with more functional communication.
Well, and even because they're using those words and sometimes using them out of context, like for those kids, I will purposely, like if they called me mom, I would turn and get their attention and say yes. And then if they didn't want that, then they would be like, oh, okay. And it might stop them because you gave them that undivided attention and redirected them. But if it's just for sensory, then let's practice other words. Let's even if it's for auditory, like he likes the way that things sound, you can practice things with like music and headphones because it'll give them that similar input, but not necessarily them saying it out loud and just repeating it,
Okay.
But those are all good options to start with and try out.
Awesome.
Anybody else have any other questions? Wait around for one more minute. Thank you guys for attending. I know it's in the middle of the day. All right. Sylvia has copies of the slides and I believe she recorded it. So she will be posting that too if you want your significant other to watch or you want to share with other families. I think it's awesome to kind of share the knowledge.
Yeah, thank you so much, Teressa, Rebecca. We are so thankful for your time and effort that you put into these great presentations. If you haven't had a chance to check out the other webinars that we have potty training, picky eating, and behavior. Those are all available on our YouTube channel and our Facebook page. And if you have any trouble finding those, shoot me a message and I'm happy to help you get there. But thank you so much. We hope you guys have a great day and we will see you next time. Thank you.
Bye. Have a great day, everybody.